In February 2020, the United Nations Human Rights Council published a landmark report on psychological torture. The report was written by their Special Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Nils Melzer. Melzer had also investigated the case of Julian Assange, the founding editor of Wikileaks, an online publisher of censored and suppressed information, since 2006.
I declined to get involved because I had this visceral reaction of, I'm not going to defend this rapist and narcissist, and I'm the Special Rapporteur on Torture. I started to get intrigued because I realized immediately when you scratch the surface, things don't add up.
Melzer's findings were disturbing.
Mr. Assange shows all the symptoms of a person who has been exposed to psychological torture for a prolonged period of time.
Assange's ordeal had been precipitated by Wikileaks publishing thousands of classified American intelligence files provided by a military whistleblower, Chelsea Manning, in 2010.
Chelsea Manning, the transgender soldier convicted of leaking the biggest trove of government secrets in U.S. history.
The Wikileaks files included a film recording of the killing of unarmed civilians in 2007 during the Iraq War.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire! Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. It's 1-8. We also have one individual appears to be wounded, trying to crawl away. Come on, let us shoot. Come on. Clear. Clear.
We can hear the soundtrack on that video. Oh, he's wounded. Fire. Knowing very well that they're shooting at rescuers. It's a war crime.
3 leading international newspapers participated in the publishing of material on the war in Afghanistan drawn from Wikileaks files. They shared Wikileaks' belief in press freedom and the public's democratic right to know what was being done in their name by their governments.
3 important organizations together.
But it was Wikileaks and Assange who were targeted by the American authorities.
That concluded that Wikileaks is a known outlet of foreign propaganda. Do you stand by that assessment?
Yes.
Do you believe that Wikileaks has released sensitive and classified information?
Yes.
Do you believe any of WikiLeaks' disclosures have endangered American lives and or put at risk American interests?
I believe both have been the result of some of their releases.
It's very important for our government to show that we have no patience for the kind of so-called whistleblowing activities of traitors.
One of those demands was that we destroy our archives of classified information relating to the Pentagon. And the demand was that we stop dealing with US military whistleblowers. If we did not follow those demands, then we would be coerced.
Assange and Wikileaks refused to comply with the American demands. Assange was to be subjected over many years to measures by the American authorities and other allied nations that accorded with the UN's definition of psychological torture.
Psychological torture is not torture light. Yeah? Psychological torture aims directly at destroying the personality of an individual by isolating them from all positive influences, by manipulating their feelings, exposing them to constant anxiety and stress, overstimulating their nervous system to a point where the forensic expert explained to me the nervous system simply collapses at some point.
The indefinite torment of constant fear and anxiety is a key component in the UN's definition of psychological torture.
The defence team will argue that Sweden has a history of sending people to the United States who then face torture, despite explicit assurances from the American authorities that that would not happen. The real fear is that if Mr. Assange is sent to the US, he'll face the death penalty.
In terms of fear and threat, often it's the anticipation of the danger that you're frightened of is experienced as more traumatic and more tormenting than the actual materialization of that threat.
He's a criminal and he ought to be hunted down and grabbed and put on trial for what he has done.
If we catch you, we're going to hang you.
There's been an extraordinary twist in the Julian Assange saga, with the Wikileaks founder seeking political asylum in Ecuador. The move follows his failed bid to avoid extradition to Sweden on sex crime allegations.
Well, I think Assange should be assassinated, actually.
He's guilty of sabotage, espionage, crimes against humanity. He should be killed.
Move him from country to country to face various charges for the next 25 years.
Julian Assange, the founder of Wikileaks, has been put on Interpol's most wanted list in connection with a case of alleged sexual assault in Sweden.
Founder Julian Assange has appeared in a London court to face extradition to Sweden.
Julian Assange has been granted bail from a British court.
Julian Assange is under house arrest at an estate about 100 miles north.
And we're just getting some breaking news that the Wikileaks founder Julian Assange has entered the Ecuadorian embassy in London seeking
where Wikileaks founder Julian Assange was questioned at the Ecuadorian embassy over rape accusations he allegedly committed in 2010.
Julian Assange dragged from Ecuador's embassy in London by British police today. The dramatic development paving the way for his possible extradition to the U.S.
Well, the judge did not hold back, sentencing Julian Assange to 50 weeks in jail.
Another key tactic is to attack a person's dignity and identity.
By putting a spotlight on Julian Assange, these states have deliberately created a monster, a purported rapist, narcissist, hacker and spy, and this poisoned narrative has really intoxicated the whole public.
The social animals and being, having worth in the eyes of others, belonging, being part of a group is deeply important to us. And so being publicly shamed, humiliated, vilified, really does attack that sense of worth and value and dignity and identity in a way that can be very destabilising.
It operates to isolate a person further from their sense of who they are and what they're all about, and to smear their name in such a way as to make it easier in terms of public opinion to do what perhaps the state wishes to do with this person.
For over 4 decades, we've campaigned to get rapists convicted. But the pursuit of Julian Assange is not about rape. It's the US government weaponizing and distorting rape in order to punish him for the Wikileaks exposés on war crimes, rape and torture.
So one thing that lets you know it's deliberate is that the facts of this case, once you let the facts of this case in, all of that stuff falls away. And the facts have been studiously kept out because that would interfere with the vilification, that would interfere with the dehumanization, and that would actually interfere with the immobilization.
Swedish prosecutors have dropped an investigation into a rape allegation made against Wikileaks founder Julian Assange in 2010. Mr. Assange,
Among the UN rapporteur's explosive findings were that the Swedish authorities had consistently refused to guarantee Assange's safety from onward extradition to America, that they had deliberately distorted the statements made by the 2 women involved, and that in collusion with the British authorities, they had deliberately kept the rape allegation against Assange in limbo for 9 years, before they finally admitted that they lacked the evidence that Assange had committed any crime.
We were then, much later, very grateful when Niels Meltzer, the UN rapporteur, published his findings that the state manipulation of the allegations are in themselves a form of psychological torture. We also noted that the Swedish, UK and American government were systematically running a smear campaign and witch hunt against Julian Assange for 9 years or more, and that in the course of that, justice was not served for anyone. The women were publicly smeared and vilified. Mr. Assange was treated by the international media as if he were guilty, even though he's never even been charged.
Furthermore, at Chelsea Manning's trial in 2013, US military testimony also confirmed that no lives had been endangered by Wikileaks publishing the whistleblower's files.
Brigadier General Robert Carr, who headed up the task force investigating the leaks, testified that he found no evidence of an intelligence source killed or even harmed as a result of Cablegate.
Removing a victim's autonomy is a key torture technique.
Several police in neighborhood buildings surveilling the embassy 24 hours, 7 days a week, with cameras and with microphones, long-range microphones, trying to get what comes from the embassy and registering every single visitor that Julian had.
One visitor in 2015 was Australian lawyer Stella Morris. A relationship developed. They had 2 children. To protect Assange's partner and their children, their identities were kept secret.
Not even then, it was an easy stay. Because the invasion of privacy, because the impossibility of fresh air, the impossibility of having sunlight, and the impossibility to walk, to even walk. The longest distance that he could walk in that embassy was 12 to 15 meters. The corridor is a very small apartment.
Taking a person's autonomy, their agency, their efficacy, their ability to control things around them and themselves is very important. In fact, being powerless and out of control is a defining feature of psychological torture.
On April 2nd, 2017, Lenin Moreno was elected as new president of Ecuador.
There's been a dramatic change since May 2017, since Moreno came to power, in terms of Ecuador's foreign policy. It's real, strong, sort of unambiguous alignment with the Trump administration.
This proved a turning point in the duress that Assange was being subjected to.
In the last year, it went much worse because the government basically isolated Julian. He was cut out internet. He was not able to have visitors, social visitors, apart from his legal team, basically. And he was threatened also by the very same government that was supposedly protecting him.
There were 2 main things happening, I think, in terms of the psychological torture. There was now the embassy wasn't safe, and there was the threat of being evicted at any moment, and there was the social isolation, being cut off from contact from the world.
Another defining feature of psychological torture is the instilling of a deep sense of helplessness and hopelessness.
I think the breaking point probably was when the protectors suddenly changed and became harassers.
We're wired to fight back or run away when we're under threat, and being rendered helpless is really deeply distressing.
I saw him worried about his fate, because by the time it was quite obvious that the government was looking for the right opportunity to get rid of him.
Being able to trust organisations and societies to follow due process, follow rule of law, you know where you are with respect to that law, you can feel safe that you're not going to be arrested or extradited. If you've got a solid legal case, you can feel safe you're not going to be abducted from the Ecuadorian embassy when you've got the laws of asylum on your side. So when all that's out the window, anything can happen. It's deeply destabilising. You don't know what you're preparing for. You don't know how you can defend yourself. You don't know what to expect next. So that arbitrariness is a very significant aspect of the torture.
Julian Assange says he will fight extradition to the United States in British court. The Wikileaks founder was arrested Thursday at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he had been living since 2012. The U.S. has charged him over a 2010...
He has since been held at London's maximum security Belmarsh prison for highly dangerous prisoners. Assange's health had suffered during almost 7 years' confinement inside the Ecuadorian embassy, when he'd had no access to hospitals or dental clinics.
It's just very moving to see Julian, particularly in those circumstances of coming out of sick bay and having lost 10 kilograms weight.
I did visit Mr. Assange in prison, Belmarsh prison, on the 9th of May in the company of two medical experts. And my primary concerns really are that I'm extremely worried about his current state of health, which was alarming already when I visited him, and which seems to have deteriorated rapidly since then to the point where he's no longer even able to stand trial and to participate in court hearings. I must say that I'm appalled at the sustained and concerted abuse that this man has been exposed to at the hands of several democratic states over a period of almost a decade.
Despite mounting concern about his health, Assange finally faced American extradition proceedings in February 2020.
We are facing a situation where a journalist and an editor faces 175 years in prison for publishing truthful information.
1 year for an appeal in future. Another appeal to the Supreme Court, 2 years. 13 years arbitrary detention for a man who hasn't committed a crime.
He's unable to pass notes in a confidential and secure way to his legal team. He's unable to seek clarification from his legal team and give instructions during the course of the proceedings. And the judges refuse his ability to leave the dock to be able to participate properly. This is obviously raising serious concerns about his fair trial rights and his ability to properly participate and defend himself in these proceedings.
At any one moment, a person like this is subject to a whole range of stressors, if you like. And it's hard to separate one off, like, say, arbitrariness, from other things, fear and anxiety, the sense they'll never be free, or they may be killed, all those sort of things. But clearly, it must substantially contribute to someone's helplessness and hopelessness, that they can't really, that the process they're under, even indeed if there is a legal process at all, their fear that it might turn out to be a mockery, that the end point is predestined.
Depriving a person of social contact and stimulation are powerful methods for disorientating an individual.
In terms of sensory deprivation, which attacks that need for environmental orientation, in Julian Assange's case, that started happening, well, it's been happening all along in the Ecuadorian embassy in terms of not being able to get outside, not being able to have, broad visual horizons that can really affect the visual system and perception. So he's had sensory deprivation going back 10 years in various ways, and then that got worse when he was cut off from the outside world in the Ecuadorian embassy. Being deprived of communication is one form of sensory deprivation, and obviously that's accelerated and intensified in Belmarsh. And things like he didn't have his glasses for 3 months. I mean, depriving people of their personal possessions and reading materials and things like glasses are classic psychological torture tactics to keep people understimulated.
He has had to stay in his cell for 23 hours of 24 a day, and as I pointed out, whatever is called by the authorities here or by Belmarsh prison, I call it solitary confinement. That's the description of solitary confinement.
The human needs that psychological torture targets are the need for safety and survival, to making people fear for their safety and survival and security, the human need for connection and attachment and, bonding, which runs very deep. I mean, they're arguably as important to people, those bonds. Babies come out really needing both things, the connection and the survival. So they're really core needs.
You do that by first isolating the person completely from the environment and then exposing him to a completely arbitrary and threatening environment which overstimulates the nervous system to a point where he collapses.
How did you survive in solitary confinement?
I was alive, but I was dead. I just want to forget it ever happened.
Assange is looking at life imprisonment with Ramzi Youssef at the Supermax.
So very stark. No matter how you spin it, there's 23 hours a day he would be in lockdown, and that 1 hour then he's not in there, he would be escorted to a caged area where he could basically walk around in circles for an hour.
If this man gets extradited to the United States. He will be tortured until the day he dies, because the prison conditions in the Supramax institutions amount to torture and other cruel and degrading treatment, not just by my standards, but all my predecessors.
That he's on medication and he's vulnerable and depressed.
We're designed for short bursts of stress and stress physiology, but when it's constant and relentless, it causes very serious problems with immunity. You know, immune cells can self-destruct, the body stops producing them, communication in the immune system breaks down, and that can render people susceptible to cancer, to atypical infections, makes him very vulnerable to coronavirus, on top of his respiratory issues and medical neglect in the embassy. So, you know, the torture is continuing in Belmarsh prison.
How worried are you about what coronavirus could mean for our prisons?
Well, this is unprecedented. Assange's poor health placed him in further danger from the coronavirus infecting prisons.
Prisons have become one of the flashpoints of the virus, with riots breaking out in Italy and thousands of inmates being freed in Iran.
In April 2020, temporary release of low-risk prisoners due to the spread of coronavirus in prisons was commenced. But an application for Assange's early release on bail as an unconvicted detainee was denied.
That's what these techniques are essentially designed to do, to break someone down so much they don't want to live, they can't function. If you starve someone, they'll become emaciated, or if you psychologically torture them, they'll become suicidal. You know, it's very predictable.
Julian rang me because he spent Christmas with me and my family in 2010 while on bail. I think he simply wanted a few minutes of escape. His speech was slurred. He was speaking slowly. Now, Julian is a highly articulate, very clear person when he speaks. And he sounded awful. And he said to me that I'm slowly dying here.
I'm Stella Morris. I am Julian Assange's partner.
This is the extraordinary YouTube post released by Wikileaks. Julian Assange, it reveals, has 2 young children, fathered while he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
I have to do this because I've taken so many steps for so many years, and I feel like Julian's life might be coming to an end.